Hey guys, and welcome back to GCC. This video marks the first episode in a series I'm gonna call Retrospective, where I take a look at some classic video games that have earned their way into gamers' hearts everywhere. If possible, I will be playing original games on original hardware for the most authentic experience possible. So let's get into it. This is Super Metroid, which was first released for the Super Nintendo on March 19th of 1994, which is about a year after I was born. It is widely acclaimed as the best Metroid game of all time, and is often lovingly referred to as the sweetheart of the series. My name is Damon, and up until recently, I had never played Super Metroid. I know, it sounds crazy, right? But first, hear me out. I grew up with an N64, it's actually right up there, and a Game Boy Color. My first Metroid game was Metroid Prime, which was released in November of 2002. My first 2D Metroid game was Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance, followed up quickly by Metroid Zero Mission in 2004. Those 3 games set my expectations for the Metroid franchise extremely high. So in 2012, when I began to dabble in NES and SNES games, of course one of the very first games I picked up was the original Metroid. I played it, and knowing that Zero Mission was a remake of the original, I went in with a set of expectations that in hindsight were not very realistic. The controls felt very clunky, Samus's weapons felt super limited without the option to shoot diagonally, and while I know that many people have said this, so I'm not the first, the environment felt repetitive, bland, and repetitive. I found myself dying way more frequently to simple mobs that in other games would never have posed a threat, and I got lost approximately every 10 seconds. I found myself sketching a rough map of the area before I ended up just looking one up online, and then ultimately giving up on the original Metroid because I'm a pleb. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and I had beat every Prime game, all the GBA and DS games, minus Federation Force, and found myself wondering why I hadn't ever picked up Super Metroid. As I said before, it is widely praised as the best in the franchise, which meant that it had some pretty tough competition. So, I headed on over to eBay, found a reputable seller with photos of the cart and the PCB to ensure that I was paying for an original copy, and a few days later, it was at my door. I plugged it in, turned on the console, and was met with a pretty slick intro sequence with full voiceover and the classic Metroid intro where 2 minutes into the game and everything is about to self-destruct. My first impressions of Super Metroid were actually not at all what I thought that they would be. The absolute first thing I noticed was that the musical score was fantastic. The second thing I noticed, though, was that the controls felt a bit unresponsive and sluggish. At first I thought it was my SN30 from 8BitDo, which I have been using on my consoles. So I thought that might have been the culprit, so I plugged in my Super Famicom controller, sat about 2 feet away from my TV because the cable was like that long, and was dismayed to find the same thing. So I figured maybe it was the emulation on my Retron 5 at fault, so I used my Google Foo to validate my concerns. Unfortunately, it seems that many people agree that the controls feel floaty, at no fault to my trusty Retron 5. There were dozens of posts from people saying, well, maybe, yeah, they do feel a bit like floaty and sluggish compared to like the later 2D games, but I like it. It gives the game character. So I said, hey, if they like it, maybe I will too. I saddled back up, once again with my SN30 to avoid having my nose against my TV, and set into the game. The map system, save points, and overall game mechanics I found to be very, very similar to the later games like Metroid Fusion, and the music was incredibly impressive considering the hardware and the limited storage capacity of an SNES cart. I have to say, overall the game holds up really, really well. Once I got used to the feel of the movement in Super Metroid, I began not to really notice the gripes I initially had. Now that I see where the franchise came from, I have a better appreciation for the later games in the series, like Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, and especially Samus Returns. I still believe that I like the controls from Fusion more than Super Metroid for a few reasons. First, I was not a fan of scrolling through with the select button to find my rockets, and I much prefer how it was done in the later games, more naturally, using the shoulder buttons as a toggle for those same power-ups. It also took me a frustratingly long time to get the hang of both wall jumping and space jumping. It wasn't really clear to me where in the arc of a jump I was supposed to start space jumping, and while it was definitely an easier, more streamlined setup in later games, I did feel a sense of pride and accomplishment in mastering it over time. Although under pressure, like in the rising lava room in Deep Norfair, I found myself missing those same jumps and ingesting a copious amount of lava while trying to spin my way back up to the surface. Those boss fights felt great. There were a few situations, like Fantoon in the wrecked ship, where I found myself entering a boss with only like 2 or 3 E-tanks, and at that point with only like 1 or 2 reserve tanks. So I found myself making great use of save states in Retron 5. After fighting Ridley in Samus Returns for the 3DS and struggling for so long that I contemplated giving up, Ridley's Super Metroid felt just hard enough to be challenging, but not hard enough that I had to spend 4 hours grinding and reading strategy guides online. There were 3 times throughout my playthrough that I got super excited. The first came when I used the Shine Spark for the first time after seeing some animals do it. I guess they were like guides to teach you how to do it. And that was really satisfying. I've seen it done in speedruns all the time, and for both Fusion and Super Metroid, so doing it myself was awesome. I ended up using it a number of times to get missile upgrades, and was always excited when I realized that that was what I had to do. The second thing that got me really excited was hearing the music in the ancient ruins of Norfair. As soon as I entered the area, I heard what I know as the theme from Magmoor Caverns in Metroid Prime. It was so cool hearing that same theme, in great quality mind you, come from a game that came out 8 years before I heard it first in Prime 1. And the third time that I got super excited was at the almost very beginning of the game, when you get the Morph Ball from the like exact same room as the original Metroid. It was so awesome, seeing the same blocks and the same configuration, you know, in the same monochrome environment that I saw probably 50 times from the original game. It was nostalgic for me, and I didn't even play the first Metroid game when it was current, so I can't even imagine how, you know, players felt coming back there after a while. It probably felt like coming home. Super cool stuff. One gripe I had with Super Metroid came from about 30 minutes into the game. I found myself stuck between a locked gate with the switch on the opposite side from where I was, and a room with a collapsing floor. I didn't know that the B button acted like a sprint because, as far as I know, no other Metroid game has a similar system of sprinting before you get the speed booster upgrade. Now, this probably just shows how common hand-holding in games is nowadays, but I legitimately thought that I had done something wrong and was like out of sequence with what I was supposed to do, and I thought I was actually stuck. Eventually, I figured it out, but not after looking high and low for something I may have missed. Overall, my experience was fantastic. Mother Brain was a really cool throwback, until you realize that you're not quite finished with the fight yet. The whole fight was just a shit show of emotions. Towards the end of the fight, when Mother Brain is like entirely red and close to death, I freaked out when I sent my last missile, only to be caught in Mother Brain's like rainbow laser death beam, and watch my health bar just drop. And then comes in like the giant Metroid that like drains Mother Brain's health, and they gave it to me. So I was like sad, and then confused, and then happy. After the battle, I was super glad to see the stereotypical countdown until destruction as I raced my way back to my ship. I can totally understand how people feel about this game and why it has earned its place in so many best video game ever lists. The gameplay is fantastic, the soundtrack is among the best in the series, and if I may be so bold, it is as much of an improvement over previous entries in the franchise as A Link to the Past is. I still hold strong on Fusion being my favorite Metroid game of all time, but Super Metroid proves that newer is not always better, looking at you, Other M, and that sometimes venerated classics really are as great as everyone says. Maybe I should have listened to my high school English teacher more, but too little too late. In my opinion, Super Metroid stands among the best in the series, and despite a few quirks, holds up as good today as it did back in 1994. Anyways guys, thanks for watching. It's been a blast diving back into the Metroid series, and speaking of A Link to the Past, since I've never actually beat that game, it's next on my list. So make sure to subscribe and keep up to date, and keep an eye out for the next episode of Retrospective, featuring The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Thanks for watching.